My name is Stephanie, and I work at World Relief Seattle as the Detention Center Post-Release Coordinator. I spend most of my time in Tacoma working with people who are released from a detention center facility there, welcoming them into the community and helping them with their next steps. In addition to that, I don't do it alone. I have an awesome team of volunteers who are welcoming people with me. We're coordinating transportation, welcoming them with backpacks and a snack as they're released from this gate, waiting to go to friends and family, both in the area and across the US. Additionally, for people who need a few extra days to figure out where they're going, we provide host homes, and I coordinate that team as well.
Very cool. And then Liz, you're also on this call. Introduce yourself, say what you do.
Yeah, my name is Liz Nelson. I work at World Relief Seattle as the Outreach Manager. So I work with our pretty incredible team of volunteer coordinators, donations coordinators, church partners, and all of the organizations and individuals that gather alongside us as we welcome refugees, asylees, and immigrants into the area.
Awesome. Well, World Relief is one of the organizations that Anchor partners with. And so I think a lot of our people are familiar, but some of them are not familiar at all with World Relief. So take a little bit of time and say kind of how did World Relief start? And then what's the mission and really heart of World Relief as an organization?
Yeah, World Relief is a national and international organization working in a broad area of refugee resettlement and development and community organization. It started after World War II as a group of churches coming alongside refugees, people who had been displaced from the war. And in Seattle, we started in 1979 when refugee resettlement first got going in the United States. So our Seattle office is really focused on welcoming and receiving and walking through that resettlement process with refugees, asylees, and immigrants. And when we say resettlement, we're referring to that first really key 3 to 6 months when someone first arrives in the United States. If you can think of what that might be like for you, getting dropped into a new country, you're looking for housing, you're trying to figure out the language, you're getting your kids enrolled in school, you're looking for work. You might be enrolling in evening classes to get your certification in your career up to standard for the United States. You're learning the bus system and filling out a ton of paperwork. But then after 3 to 6 months, what happens next? You might be self-sufficient, you might have a job, you might have an apartment, your kids are going to school, you're learning the language, but we know there's so much more to really building that social network and getting integrated back into a community here. So because of that, at World Relief, we've expanded the work that we do to really focus on welcoming people in community, rooting them in community, and then empowering them for community. So that looks like everything from a women's sewing class to a community garden where people can grow food to the, native to their country, to a summer youth academy for kids to get familiar with the school system, to an employment team that helps people not just get their first job, but then go and get a job that really fits with their career and interest here in the United States, and quite a bit more.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that. Obviously, we're many months now into a global event, right? We have COVID-19, but I'm assuming that just because there's a pandemic, that doesn't mean that it stops conditions that cause people to need to flee their home country. So how has that been for you guys as an organization of knowing that there are still, I'm assuming, refugees that are in need of help that are still moving in the midst of a time like this is probably even more difficult. How has COVID-19 affected the work you guys are doing?
Yeah, it's been a really difficult situation for a lot of people. Many people who were issued visas or were promised the ability to find safety in the United States, and then when borders shut down and flights stopped, they're kind of in this stuck limbo situation or have family members who are in that situation. So we've seen people waiting. We've seen people unsure of how long they'll be in a very unsafe or tenuous situation. But one interesting thing is people are still being released from the detention center in Tacoma, and so we are still welcoming people and trying to figure out next steps for them. So Stephanie can share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's one of the essential services that we are still able to provide. We've had to pivot quite a bit from being in an RV to setting up tents and making sure everybody's socially distanced with masks and all of the gloves and everything like that. And additionally, it's a little harder to help them get to their next steps because there's less flights out there. So if people have a family member across this country, they might have to wait a few days in order to get there, or the flight might be canceled or rebooked. So there are extra challenges for folks, and just the unknown of having to travel or be in a new place when they aren't easily able to socially distance when you're at an airport or wherever it may be. So not only are they in this transition period of getting from one place to the next, but now there's the disease that they have to be cautious of and trying not to be in contact with people who may have that.
Totally. No, that makes sense. So something that you guys had talked about a little bit is this is a global issue, but it really feels close to home in Tacoma in that, I mean, I think I lived in Tacoma for probably 4 or 5 years before I realized that there was a detention center, like that I drove by on my way from Northeast down to downtown, right? Like in that region. Talk to us a little bit more about that detention center, maybe a little bit about how do individuals end up getting placed there? How long are they required or forced to stay there? And what does release look like? Talk a little bit more about that aspect that's so close to home for us.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. You wouldn't know it was there, right? Just because it's over the Port of Tacoma Bridge in a very industrious area where the capacity of the detention center is 1,575 people. So it's a very large facility. And if you can imagine it like a prison, basically, where people are held in pods of 50 to 100 people, having to stay in that space for basically the whole day. They might have one area that they're allowed to go outside in a fenced yard, with barbed wire above it, just to get a little bit of fresh air. But really, they're in this holding facility for anywhere from a few weeks to a year or more. And they're there for immigration court proceedings. So it may be immigration court proceedings, or because they're fleeing for their life and they're requesting sanctuary in the U.S. As an asylum seeker, which is similar to refugee status.
Yeah.
And the reason they end up in Tacoma is because oftentimes there aren't space at the facilities along the border. So they bus people up to the detention center here in Tacoma because it's one of the larger facilities. Additionally, for people who have been maybe in the U.S., could have been picked up in an ICE raid if they don't have documentation and are then put there. So you might have people who have been in the U.S. for a long time, 15, 20 years, or someone who, when they're released, it's their first day basically of freedom in the U.S. And there are all of the courts happen inside. So they either have a TV judge, or I'm not sure how they're doing it with COVID, if the judges are actually there or not. But they present their case in front of a judge. And unlike in a criminal court system, they are not granted a lawyer. Wow. So most people are fighting these cases by themselves unless they have the money to pay for a lawyer, or if a nonprofit pro bono system, a lawyer is able to help them out. So it's very difficult, as you can imagine, trying to represent yourself in front of a judge in often not your own language and
right.
in a new
not your own culture. Like I wouldn't want to represent myself, and I grew up here and I live here, let alone if I didn't know any of the language or the culture. That's so tough.
Yeah. So if they win their case, then they are released, and they oftentimes don't know it's that day that the judge is like, yep, you can stay in the U.S. You've won your case, and then they do like a book out system, and they're told not to book their flights until they're released. So we don't know who's coming out. We don't have any heads up. So our team's there from 3 p.m. till 7 o'clock at night in anticipation and to welcome people we watch them. There's a dead end on one side, and so there's really only one way they can walk down, and they have these big clear plastic bags with their stuff. And we welcome them, and we ask them what their plans are, and we help them coordinate their transportation if their family is not close. If they don't have any friends or family, we connect them to a World Relief program and try to get them set up here, or find other community resources for them. And right now with COVID, the numbers are significantly less in order to help with that, preventing the disease from spreading. And so they are taking some precautions, which we're thankful for, to protect people inside. But before pre-COVID, there was anywhere from maybe 3 to 10 people who were released a day, and it's down to about 1 or so. So there are less people who are being released right now.
Wow, thanks for sharing all that. Some of that I know in just the research, but a lot of that I hadn't, and so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that are watching this that that's the first that they've heard about kind of this large facility right in our backyard. I think the follow-up question that I am feeling, I think a lot of people are going to be feeling as they're watching this, is what can we, as regular people, members of Anchor, what can we do to help you guys in what you're doing?
Do you want me to take that?
I can start and then pass it off to you, Stephanie.
Great.
I think one of the big things you can do is just learn about the ICE processing center, the detention center in Tacoma. It's really easy to not know it's there. It's really easy to not know what's in our backyard, and it's intentionally so on behalf of GEO, who is a privately run company, a for-profit company that runs the detention center there. And so just being aware of what's in our neighborhoods, what's in our area, and then through the awareness, being able to pray. And that's one thing that I consider a great privilege of being a nonprofit that works closely with churches, is we have access to these communities of faith. When we hit something that seems impossible, or programs that we used to be able to do in person, now we're like, well, what do we actually do? Stephanie and I were having this conversation recently of what's left for us when we can't access, or we can't visit people inside and people aren't being released. What do we do? And it's prayer. It's praying for the detainees who are inside. It's praying for their families who haven't heard from them. It's praying for the judges and the staff who are battling all kinds of inconveniences trying to make their cases. It's praying for the lawyers who are giving their time pro bono to assist people through their cases. And also just praying for all of the decision makers at the border as well, who are deciding who stays and who goes, and who receives protection and who gets turned away. So those are some really big ones. And then there's a few practical things as well that I'll pass off to Stephanie.
Before we throw it to Stephanie, I do want to interject, because you said something there again that I didn't know. I think a lot of our people don't know, and I don't want to just I feel like it's really important to come back to it. That awareness piece is so huge, and I didn't know that the company running the detention center is a for-profit company. And again, we're not putting any value judgment on it, but I think more people in Tacoma need to know that there is a company that is making a profit off a detention center in our backyard. And I think that kind of awareness and information is really important. We can, let's keep doing that, of spreading the words of hey, this is a part of our city. And so people should know about it and can do with that information what they want, whether that is getting involved, whether it is praying, whether it is some of those other practical things. So what are some of those practical things, Steph?
Right. And to go back to that, John, awareness is so important, and also understanding that we are in a really unique position across the United States to have such close access to an immigration detention center. Most of the other detention centers are hours and hours away from the city and very inaccessible. And so even though we've looked at replicating some of the programs that we do around the country, there's not a single one that is quite this accessible around the United States. And so though it's really heartbreaking to see what's happening in our city, it's also a unique privilege to be able to access it and to be able to learn and to be able to visit and to be able to help.
Totally. No, that's a good word. Thanks for putting that in.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to add about what Liz was saying with prayer was we another one of our coworkers works with Bible study leaders who are
Oh,
inside of
cool.
the detention center. And so those Bible studies are still happening, and the
Oh, neat.
global church of people from around the world, different coming from different places, people are learning about Jesus. And prayer for them, as the sometimes the Bible study leaders are just becoming believers, as they've just become
Hmm.
believers or they've been believers for a while, and they go through these workbooks and they're worshiping together, they're praying together. So just for continued growth in prayer as they disciple others or witnessing to others. I remember that was one of the most encouraging things when I first started, was to just see the faith of a lot of the brothers and sisters in Christ who are in detention, and what they're choosing to do with their time. I mean, they would say they would spend like 3 or 4 hours just like in prayer. And I was like, wow, I have a hard time with
Hmm.
10 minutes sometimes.
Yeah.
4 hours, but just so intentional, and their strength and their courage in the Lord, not only for their relationship, but also then sharing that. So just continued prayer for them, as they're in a very uncertain time, yet as they're growing in their relationship with the Lord and sharing it with others.
Totally.
Um, yeah, and then on a practical level, a couple
Yeah.
of things that Anchor can be doing. One is to donate gift cards. This is a really cool way of relief through empowerment, where when people are released or they're new to the country, they often either they both don't have a lot of resources available to them, or limited. A lot of choices are being made for them as well.
Yeah.
And so when you get a gift card, from Amazon or from Fred Meyer, from Safeway, like, you're the one who gets to choose like
Hmm.
what food makes the most sense for your culture. And so it's a really unique way of both welcoming and empowering people at the same time.
Yeah,
Additionally,
that's really cool to be able to be a part of, like, I don't know, like helping restore people's
mhm,
dignity, where it feels like that's been taken for circumstances really largely out of their control.
mhm, right, right. Yeah, and secondly, we're looking for host homes that have separated spaces. So whether that's like an Airbnb, additional dwelling unit, or maybe a basement space that has a separate entrance. Sometimes people are released, like oftentimes asylees, they won't have friends or family, and so we can get them connected to World Relief Program and help them find permanent housing. But that takes a little
Yeah.
bit to find an apartment. You're new to the area, like, where do we find an apartment? So that takes a few weeks. And so host homes provide a really cool stopgap to welcome people as they're waiting to get into their own housing. And with COVID right now, a lot of the host homes
Yeah.
are not available to host, just because of the way that
Yeah.
the house is set up. And so we're looking for these separated spaces, um, to be able to socially distance, to do a socially distanced hosting. So that's another way. And lastly, very direct with the detention center are volunteers at the RV. We're
Mm,
especially looking for Spanish speakers, because
cool.
over 50%, I would say, of people who are released speak Spanish. And so that's really helpful. Um, but even not, if you're available to help with transportation from
Hmm.
the detention center to the airport, that's helpful as well. So those are 3 ways to get involved.
Awesome. No, that makes a ton of sense. So the real practical things are raise awareness, tell people about it. Gift cards, as we help kind of empower and restore dignity and agency to people as they start to live their lives again. Housing in a temporary fashion, right? Because if you've tried to rent or buy in Tacoma, it takes a while to find something long term, and so finding something for them short term. And then those volunteers at the detention center, in particular, pressing me at this time for those who speak Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they are interested in volunteering, any of those things, what's the best way to reach out to you guys to get in touch to find out more information from you guys as an organization?
Yeah, you can go ahead and send me an email to our organization. It's smurray at wr.org, MURRAY. And we can just get you in touch with the right people
Cool.
to get connected to next steps.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking some time today. We really appreciate the conversation.